Welcome back to Quick Take Charge. I'm Tim Stenovec in New York. Well, the most beloved place to buy Bitcoin these days, Coinbase, is planning to go public using a direct listing with an almost $100 billion valuation. But with frequent service outages and sky-high transaction costs, what's making it so popular? Here to discuss what he describes as a crypto cult in his latest Bloomberg Opinion article is the Daily Dirt Naps editor, Jared Dillon. Hey, Jared, thanks for joining us on this. Before we get to Coinbase, I do want to hit on Dave Portnoy because you were head of ETFs you're head of ETF trading at Lehman Brothers. What do you make of Portnoy's entrance into ETFs with this Buzz ETF that launches this week?
Well, first of all, I hope Portnoy realizes that he is now one of the suits.
He's one of the guys he criticizes, right?
Portnoy is a suit. It's an interesting ETF. It looks to me like a high beta, large cap S&P ETF. You know, I looked at the back testing. It's performed really well. We don't really know how it performs in a bear market. If it's really a high beta ETF, it might underperform when stocks go down. You know, I think the fees are appropriate even for a US ETF. And it's a very interesting product. I mean, you know, when I think about the premise of it, you know, when I look at sentiment on Twitter and social media and stuff like that, I mean, one thing it might fail to capture is when sentiment is actually peaking. I mean, if you're investing in the stocks that are the most talked about, then you might miss the turn when things start to go down.
Is there any sort of regulatory red flag because of who Portnoy is? Because he is so active on social media, he is promoting this. Could that get him in any hot water?
Well, you know, I think if he was going to be in hot water, he'd be in hot water by now. You know, I'm not a compliance expert. I really don't know much about compliance and asset management and disclosures that are involved. I saw the video. I mean, obviously, this is a very unconventional sort of way to advertise an ETF, but I don't know. It seems to be working.
Yeah, seems to be working. It has gotten a lot of views, and it hasn't even been out for a full day yet. Well, speaking of disclosures, I want to talk a little bit about Coinbase's disclosures because, as you write, there are some unusual risks that are disclosed in the prospectus for the IPO filing, including one about this mystery man who has $50 billion in Bitcoin right now. But it doesn't seem like that's slowing down interest in Coinbase. Explain.
Well, you know, it's funny because I have some history with Bitcoin. I started investing in Bitcoin 2 years ago. I've been following it for a long time. And, you know, if you've spent any time on Twitter, you know, Bitcoin has sort of has a cult on Twitter and on social media. And it's a very devout cult. And anytime, you know, somebody like Peter Schiff says anything negative about Bitcoin, they gang up on him. You know, and one of the things that I've tried to square is the price action of Bitcoin relative to this cult activity, because, you know, if you remember last week, Bitcoin peaked when Bitcoin people were putting laser eyes in their profile pictures on Twitter, you know? So I look at that type of behavior and I say, this is insane behavior. This has to be a top. And yet throughout all this craziness, you have increasing institutional adoption, you know, so it's really tough to figure out.
All that said, you've been very open with your purchase of Bitcoin, with your sale of Bitcoin in January. You purchased $80,000 of Bitcoin back in 2019. You sold all of that in January, right?
Yeah, I sold it all.
So that got you $310,000 as far as you know, before taking into account fees and of course the initial cost. What did you learn about Coinbase's business in that process?
You know, Coinbase is different from a stock brokerage. It's different from Charles Schwab or E-Trade or Ameritrade and stuff like that. Two different businesses. And the interesting thing about Coinbase is that they rely completely on fees. You know, if you look at a Charles Schwab, they make most of their money off of net interest income, then off securities lending and margin, and then payment for order flow. But Coinbase gets all their money off of fees, and the fees are very, very high. If you're paying with from a bank account, it's 1.49%. If you're paying with a credit card, I don't know this exactly, but I think it's 3.5%. So the fees are extremely high. And the commission that I paid to sell my Bitcoin was $5,000.
Wow.
This is a very good business.
Is it a business that is, though, threatened by, I mean, it's funny because it's kind of like old school, right? You talk about how the commissions are higher than 1981, for example. Is there a threat to Coinbase's business by some sort of enterprising, it's funny to call a competitor a startup to Coinbase because that's what Coinbase is, an enterprising company that comes up with like the equivalent of payment for order flow and just gets rid of commissions?
There will be fee compression over time, and Coinbase does have some competitors like Binance and Gemini that do have lower fees. Coinbase, happens to be the most attractive platform for a number of reasons. They're a U.S. registered exchange. They do know your customer and stuff like that. So they tend to be the most viable option, but there will be fee compression over time, perhaps significant fee compression.
So how do you think about the future of Bitcoin? You sold all of your Bitcoin. Is it a currency? Is it an asset class? Is it a competitor gold? Should people have it in their portfolios?
I believe that it's not really a currency. People don't, if you go back to 2015, people were calling Bitcoin a cryptocurrency, and nobody even really calls it a cryptocurrency anymore. Nobody's pretending that this is a medium of exchange. It's a digital asset. It's an alternative asset on the blockchain, and it's different from gold. I mean, gold is an analog asset, and the attraction of gold is that it's off the grid and it's untraceable. Bitcoin is traceable and it's not anonymous. So that is the one distinction between Bitcoin and gold. And I think at some point, gold is going to have a renewed interest among investors.
The Daily Dirt Nap editor and a Bloomberg Opinion contributor, Jared Dillon. Hey, Jared, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for taking the time.